Well, I seem to have opened up a can of worms on the videos I put out on the comms director for the church and the tweets that I have put out. I want to go over a couple of things here that I think are very important. Number one, I want to clarify some things because some people are pulling some things out of context. I think it's important to see what happened and talk about the discussion that has happened afterward, right? And, by the way, I want to talk about a certain phone call also. Now, this episode is brought to you by Cardio Miracle. You guys know that I take this every day. This here is what I take when I go on trips. I travel quite a bit, and I always grab these. I take several of these little travel packets of Cardio Miracle. I drop this into a glass of water, mix it up, and I take it every day. Wouldn't even traveling halfway around the world, I do not go without the Cardio Miracle. To find out more, go to cwicmedia.com, cwicmedia.com. Scroll to the bottom and you will see a short video that I have put out on Cardio Miracle. Okay, I want to start off with an X post that I put up and cover this a little bit because I want to clarify where I'm coming from. This is what I said. It's disturbing how many bad characters there are on X. I'm going to get to that in a minute. I want my position to be clear. I have never criticized the hiring of Aaron. That's important. And many people are mad or they think it's semantics to me or something. No, it's not. I'll go over that. But I've never criticized the hiring of Aaron. I have never advocated for his removal. I have never attacked Aaron's character. And not in any episode that I have done, and I've done several when he was hired to now the family proclamation controversy, have I ever done that. And in fact, in many cases, I've done just the opposite. I continue here with this. The inability to parse out the man and the church on one side and the event and issue of the family proclamation being consistently skirted on the other is a severe lack of critical thinking. And members of the church have experienced a real sense of stifling the family proclamation. This is real. Don't invalidate the experiences that so many members have had and what is going on right now, right? And by the way, that is the issue. It's not really even Aaron. That's the issue. This is just kind of in the middle of everything that's already happening out there, right? And I go on and say there's no need for a scapegoat and there's no need for a witch hunt. That is not how things work. I want to go over these things. And I go on and say there is no need for a scapegoat and no need for a witch hunt. That is the wrong way to approach this. That's not going to do anything. It might make you feel better because you've canceled someone. But that's not the point. The issue is so much larger than all of this, right? So I want to go back and look at the context coming up to the fair conference, okay? First of all, it's very clear to everyone and a concern to most members of the church, I would say, in the U.S., that identity and family are being broken down, right? The woke madness that is out there, the lunacy of taking away identity, taking away biology, taking away the binary, and breaking down the family is a threat that we have all experienced. Whether we're online or we are at work, wherever it is, these things have been encroaching on us culturally and into our homes and into our media. And it happens inside of the church. And there have been, honestly, other officials, other leaders within the church that have skirted the family proclamation, at least in the past. And so many members are just kind of throwing up their hands and saying, what in the world is going on? Right? That is the environment that we're in. And most importantly, it is personal to individuals where they have lost a kid who's gone off into this woke ideology of breaking down the family, breaking down identity. You know, it's a few years ago, maybe just a couple of years ago, President Nelson in a YSA fireside talked about what I call the identity hierarchy. And he talked about how, there are three different identities that we need to put first. And first is a child of God. The second is a child of the covenant. And the third is a disciple of Christ. And if you put a line under those three, all other identities are below that. And what identitarianism does is it throws everything off by grabbing those other identities that are below that line and putting them up to the top. The LGBTQ stuff. And it's not that that isn't real. It's not that, I'm not a certain, I am a certain race. I am a certain nationality. I have a certain DNA. People have sexual orientation, a gender. These things are all true, but they're all below those things. And when you try and take those things and put them on top, that's where everything goes nuts. And we've seen so much of this. And many people, hundreds, perhaps thousands, that I have received comments and direct emails and contact forms on the website from, have experienced this in church, from the pulpit, testimonies in their Sunday school class, elders quorum, relief society, young men, young women, primary. So people come into this very anxious and worried about things. And I hear about all of this. And by the way, the platform that I have built on this, I did the same thing at BYU. If you're wondering if I've actually had that many people contact me, which is always what somebody brings up. You can see here, this is something I put up a few years ago. You've got creating awareness of BYU professors radicalizing students. Well, that wasn't really happening. That's what I kept getting the pushback on until I put everything out there on video and showed everybody actually what was happening with certain professors. It's not like it was pervasive everywhere, but there were a number of different professors that were doing some crazy lunacy in their teaching at BYU. So you can see here 5,758 right now. Pretty much over 5,000 of those came within, the first few months that I had put this up. And it says down here, sign the petition. This is not a petition for activism. Look at the title again, creating awareness. I'm not trying to change anything. I'm trying to make people aware. They can make a change if they want. And that's important to understand, because that's not what I'm doing with this situation with the comms director. I'm not out there trying to be an activist with the church. And many of you have already, put that on me. Like I'm an activist and I want to do something. No, it's not. Why can't you parse that out? I've already been through this. I know exactly what I did with BYU. And by the way, with that petition, there were roughly 1,000 stories of individuals, students and parents, giving stories about what had happened at BYU. And what's going on with this is no different. This is prior to the Q&A with Aaron Sherinian. I'm talking about what, the people that have contacted me about the family proclamation issues. And then you have those that go as far as to say, well, using the phrase that some people often like to throw out there, well, you're studying the ark, Greg. Stop studying the ark. I am not studying the ark. I'm not anywhere near the ark. Imagine the children of Israel out in the wilderness. That's where this phrase comes from. I am way out on the outskirts, far away from the ark, out in the wilderness. I see unsheathed swords, ideologically speaking, in the hands of a number of enemies and those that are unwittingly helping them coming in toward the camp. And I'm just yelling, hey, look what's coming here. Look what's after us. That's all I'm doing. I have zero responsibility with those types of things in the church. I've got a calling. That is all that I do in my ward or stake. And yes, I can parse that out. I can separate that. And that's the way it should be approached. Now, I want to address the question. So now that we've set this kind of environment up, first of all, so Aaron is invited to the FAIR conference. Right now, there's already the background with Aaron. There were some issues when he was hired a year and a half ago where people had some issues with him, including me. Now, I can do that and be aware and not talk about the brethren hiring him or anything else that has to do with the church. I'm just talking about what is. What is? Do I put my head in the sand? Do you put your head in the sand? Or are you aware of what is? Neither you nor I have a responsibility in who is hired in Salt Lake. And I have a pretty firm boundary on not crossing a line that goes into activism with the church. And many of you are going to say, well, you're bringing it up is just activism. No, it's not. No, it's not. I'm not calling for anything. And then others of you say, well, you should be calling for something. You should be going after the brethren. You should be going after the church. Look, that's not my job, and it's not yours. And I want you to remember something. When you go after the head of a body, you cut the head off of a body, And then the whole body falls apart. Just remember that. You cut the head off of the body, the whole body dies. You don't do that. And for me, it's just, I did this the same way with BYU, where rarely did I ever bring up the name of a professor and looking for a scapegoat or a firing. There was only one time I brought up the name of a professor, and it was because I was defending myself. Because I'm not trying to create a scapegoat. I'm not trying to create a witch hunt. So there is a background coming into the conference that already exists. What happened at the conference does not happen in a vacuum. There is an environment within the church in the U.S. and probably Canada where you've got these things happening a lot. And if you are not sure, or you've never heard of this, or you don't know, well, you're the rare one. So between the environment within the members of the church and what they're concerned about, and they're valid in being concerned about this, and the background with Aaron, that brings us to this point where this Q&A happens with the presentation at the fair conference. Now, here's the question. I will say up front, for complete transparency, I thought it was a little more direct, and I'm going to show why I don't think that really matters. But I thought the question was a little bit more direct when I heard it. I was there, which was, do you support the family proclamation? Right? But I want to explain the question here a little bit. Here it is. I'm going to quote it. And this is the transcript that Matthew Watkins had put together before the video was taken down, okay? Here's the question, quote, when you first came on board, this is the host to Aaron Sherinian, when you first came on board the church, there was a lot of online flack, should we say. And people even, and then he brings this up, and he says even the word directly, right? He says, I've gotten a few questions here, which were the most amount of questions on a single point in the conference, right? He says, I've gotten a few questions here asking directly whether or not you support the family proclamation. Asking directly whether or not you support the family proclamation. So those were submitted from the attendees, the guests at the conference. And then he finishes it off and says, and how was that for you when you first came on board? Has it improved, and how do you deal with that? So a lot of people are talking about the question in a way that is, well, that wasn't the question about the family proclamation, right? It was more about the flack you took when you were hired. Well, again, the flack that he took, and I was a part of that, the flack that he took when he was hired was about the exact same thing. There's no difference here, right? The whole thing is couched in the flack when you're hired and in the family proclamation. Okay. Now, I want a couple more points about some of the aftermath here that has happened from this before I go further on this. First of all, Scott Gordon, who is the head of FAIR, has been criticized for the way he handled this or the way that he asked the questions. That is ridiculous. This is not an investigative journalist. He is not trying to grill the guests in the Q&A sessions. He's grateful that Aaron and all the other speakers are there. It's just a friendly little Q&A for the audience afterward. So those that are saying, well, he should have done this or this is ridiculous, come on. And secondly, FAIR has taken some flack, which I really don't understand because of this whole Q&A issue. Let me tell you something. FAIR is, in my opinion, by far the best, call it a third-party organization, an NCO, right, a non-church organization that there is out there. They do an amazing job. And quite frankly, they need even more support. And I'm going to ask right now, I gave a donation to them. I'm going to ask anybody here that would help with them to give a donation to FAIR. I'm going to put the link for the donation in the description box on YouTube. And it can be a small donation or larger, whatever it is, please go and help out. They are phenomenal. And it's not just the conference, it's everything that they do. And I support them 100%. So the answer was not, he didn't address the family proclamation. And that's the issue that I had taken and that many others had taken. Why? What is the big deal that a church employee, well, he's a comms director, number one, and why would it be a big deal whether or not he's answered it? Well, again, the environment that we're sitting in, the environment of the Family Proclamation, you see so many people online going to X or Family or Facebook or anywhere else, and you see people really pushing the Family Proclamation. They are intuitively or consciously trying to get that message out there as much as possible in a world that is breaking it down. And so when given an opportunity, one would hope that the answer is very much in the affirmative. Anyway, right? I don't want to linger on this. And I'll get to a little bit more of this later on. But those that have those concerns about the Family Proclamation, there wasn't to me that would have been just so great, right, to hear that. And I think that if Aaron had the chance to go back, I think even if he wasn't as direct even with it, or he doesn't, he's got his own reasons, I'm sure, but I think he would have probably answered it a little bit differently. Now, the aftermath of all of this has been very difficult. It's not like this is the first time I've gone through this. I deal with this in so many, whether it's BYU or Deseret Book or polygamy, so many different issues. It's hard, and that's what I've chosen, right? But most of the reaction has been actually very positive, because those individuals know what they're going through. They know the concern, and they know that there's a battle out there. But there have been some reactions that I think are baseless. And I want to talk about this, and I know some people just are not going to agree with me on this. But here's an example that came from Facebook. Quote, "Public opposition of the first presidency and quorum of the 12 apostles is apostasy. Greg is a bored, middle-aged man who happens to have a good radio voice." Again, for me, I just don't understand how you can't parse that out. I have never gone after the brethren, ever. I've got almost 1,700 videos on YouTube. I don't know if there is an online voice that has been more supportive of the church and the brethren. This is a church employee in a public environment, a video that went up that people clipped, and I put out a video, eventually 3 videos, this is the 4th, and a tweet that next morning. And some people believe that everything goes back to the brethren. Everything goes back to the church itself. And I don't buy it. There is a real sense of an appeal to authority that people have, especially the younger generation. And you look at the craziness that's happened at all the campuses where, something happens with a microaggression to some student, and all of a sudden they're trying to get to the president of the university. And, hey, we're going to shut this down. We're going to do this. We're going to cancel this. It's kind of this idea that their parents have been helicopter parents their whole lives, and they can't handle things on their own. And so they're going to appeal to the authority, and everybody thinks that's the avenue that you have to go to. I don't want to be a jerk to some of those that have said those types of things, but it's a little infantile to me, right? I sustain the brethren. This has nothing for me to do with them. Well, Greg, they hired him. Okay, that's their job. They probably have reasons to do that. I'm not even questioning that. I'm talking about what is. And you don't need, also, the other thing is all the focus on Aaron for all of this. And I understand this is the event that triggers all of this, and this is what I put up on X and YouTube. But ultimately, it's not even about Aaron. It's the same thing at BYU when I was working with the issues and showing what was going on at BYU. I didn't give the names because I didn't want a witch hunt. I didn't want a scapegoat, because firing a professor at BYU is not going to do anything except make you feel good. If any of you have ever studied Rene Girard, it was over at Stanford, which you should. It's fantastic philosophical meat. He has a theory that he just put together called mimetic desire, where one person has this desire toward something, which in this case would be hammering those that criticize the Family Proclamation or avoid it, and then others kind of want the same thing. There's an energy there that you start building a community around it and a movement, and then you eventually want a scapegoat. And so you make a sacrifice. That is human nature. And some of it is true to some degree. I mean, in the premortal world, we wanted to bond ourselves together, and we do bind ourselves together on the idea that Jesus Christ is going to sacrifice himself, right? But there is good sacrifice and there is bad sacrifice. And focusing the overall idea on this, and I know that this is the most recent event, but it won't be the last, is not the real issue. The issue is, how is the family proclamation handled? Are people avoiding it at times? What's happening in your ward, in your stake? And how does that compare to the broader culture where you live? I go more along the lines with this guy on Facebook who put up this post. He says, I disagree that a critique of Sherinian is a critique of the brethren. My concern about Sherinian's unwillingness to affirm the truths of the family proclamation has to do with Sherinian alone. I don't think he should be fired, and I don't necessarily doubt that he was the right choice. That is exactly my thoughts. This is in response to something I had put out there. He goes on to say a few more things here, and I'm cherry picking on this, but I'm not going to talk about the whole thing. It's pretty long. He says a lot of LDS are concerned about this. That's valid. It's valid, right? And there's some that have said, well, you should be taking this. Someone made a video on this. I haven't seen it, but I've heard a lot about it. That you should be taking this through the proper church channels, right? Here's his point on that. I'm not sure that even applies to a mere church employee. He then says, point 2, this particular example is a public figure and we're commenting on his public actions. It's what is. This leads me to believe that public critique is warranted. And then he says, in response to this thread, he says, you're right to be concerned about division among the saints. And I appreciate this. He says, but I think we both know that Greg Mattson's style is absolutely not divisive. And some people are going to throw up their hands and say, come on. But I think most people that follow what I do would say the same thing. I believe that because that's the feedback that I get and because that is what I try to do. I don't try to be divisive, but I understand that conflict comes up when you bring something up. And in our culture, we're very used to just putting our head in the sand on so many issues. And we can't do that anymore. We live in the internet age. You can't do that anymore. He continues and says, speaking of myself, he's not sowing seeds of doubt, and he's certainly not criticizing the brethren. The point he's making is that we ought to be alarmed at the level of rejection we find from outside of the church and inside the church regarding one's approach to the family proclamation. I really appreciate this guy saying this and articulating it this way. It's exactly the way I feel and exactly what I'm trying to do. Now, about the phone call. This is also important. In fact, this is the most important thing I'm saying here. I reached out to Aaron a couple of days ago. He responded fairly quickly, which I wasn't sure he would do. And I really appreciate it. It's a very gracious move for him, regardless of what you think of his position or what he avoided or didn't avoid or whatever else. Because I had already put out what I did on X. I had put out what I did on YouTube. And he was willing to call me back. And first of all, that spoke volumes to me about his character, and it should speak volumes to you about his character. We talked about several things, including cultural pressures, the things that are changing in the world. We talked about many things, including the breakdown of the family. We talked about certain stats that affected the membership of the church that I had brought up to him. He repeated his great support for the brethren and his dedication to the church. And the conversation was very amiable. I can't discuss everything that we discussed, but I can tell you that he's a good man. He is a good man. In terms of the family proclamation, what I would look at from here on out is what has he done with the church, with his calling in regards to the family proclamation, and what is he going to do for the remainder of his time there? As the saying goes, action speaks louder than words. That's what I would focus on. Otherwise, I think we need to move on from Aaron and continue to support and advocate for the family proclamation. Lastly, I want to say this, and I know that a lot of people don't agree with me on this. We're a very polite people, and I'm not going to say I'm not polite, but I I've usually been willing to say things that are not usually very comfortable. But that's who I am, and that's the way I've always conducted business. I've had a few different small companies and dealt with everyone from other small companies and entrepreneurs to Fortune 500 CEOs. And right, I want to look at what is. That's how I find truth. What is? Show me what is. And this discussion has to be had. What are we doing about family? What is happening within the church on the ground level? How do we, as members of the church, with the principles of the gospel, with the principles of the family proclamation, hold off the world and not let this identitarianism lunacy that is a breakdown of gender, it's a breakdown of identity, it is a breakdown of family, it is everything against the family proclamation and the doctrine of the church, the doctrine of the gospel. That is the issue. This is just another step in several things that I have covered on this issue. I hope that clears some things up for you. Thanks for listening.